Texas A&M shocked me and the whole entire world when they defeated Alabama this past Saturday, 41 to 38. And man, I was really surprised because the last time I watched Texas A&M played, they were defeated by Arkansas, and Arkansas pretty much had their way with Texas A&M. And this Texas A&M team against Alabama this past Saturday was an entirely different team than what I saw when I last saw them play, because the last time we watched Arkansas defeat Texas A&M, the offensive line play wasn't great. Zach Calzada wasn't great. Like, Texas A&M just wasn't that good. But then they end up flipping the switch against Alabama. And Zach Calzada, man, like, for all of the scrutiny that he's received from Texas A&M fans on social media, he had a damn good performance. He was 21 to 31, 285 pass yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. He had a big run late in the game, even though he had a banged up knee. Initially, it felt like they were going to have to end up putting in their third string quarterback, who was pretty much a walk-on. And it ended up, Zach Calzada came back out of the tent. He was good, ready to go, came back in and put Texas A&M in a position to win the game. And you got to give a hats off to Jimbo Fisher, because he is the first Nick Saban assistant to ever beat his former employer, because Nick Saban's record against his former assistants is off the charts. So when you look at Jimbo Fisher, Texas A&M had a incredible game plan. And you got to look at the fact that they had a lot of young guys playing on the offensive side of football, especially when it came to the offensive line. And for Texas A&M, they did this in a unconventional fashion, because if you were to lay out the recipe for what Texas A&M had to do to beat Alabama, you definitely would have thought that they would have to have a big day on the ground. But they only had 94 rushing yards as a team. Alabama outrushed them for 153 rushing yards. Bryce Young had a pretty good performance, 28 of 48, 369 pass yards, 3 touchdowns, interception. Brian Robinson ran for 147 yards, averaging 6.1 per attempt. And when you look at Alabama in this game probably should have been a little bit more in Texas A&M's favor, but since Alabama is so good of a team, they were able to close the gap. But the reason why Alabama lost this game was because, first of all, this isn't the normal Alabama team that we're accustomed to seeing. Normally, when you watch Alabama, they're really good up front in the trenches when it comes to their defensive line play, when it comes to their offensive line play. Well, in this game, they weren't really all that great in neither aspect. Their offensive line allowed 4 sacks. Their defensive line pretty much wasn't able to get consistent pressure on Zach Calzada. Zach Calzada didn't go down none. And on top of that, Alabama just looked like they were the more undisciplined team compared to Texas A&M. They had more penalties than Texas A&M. They lost a turnover battle to Texas A&M. The wide receivers also had a lot of drops, man. Like, the wide receivers were really putting the ball on the ground, man. Like, after Monday's practice, them boys better make sure they're on that catching machine, man, getting their hands right, because there were a lot of drop passes in that game. The play calling wasn't really the best from Bill O'Brien. And here's the thing. Everybody on social media was so quick to call out Bill O'Brien and his play calling. Bill O'Brien's play calling, to me, and I've watched a lot of Alabama games this year, even the games they had against not so good opponents, I don't really feel like the play calling has been that bad from Bill O'Brien. I just felt like there were a couple of plays that if he had the opportunity to go and redo them, he probably would have called it differently. But at the same time, there were a lot of drops. The offensive line didn't really play well. Like, I don't really think it's fair to just put all of the criticism on Bill O'Brien. But, you know, since everybody already has a disdain for Bill O'Brien because of what happened during his time to Houston Texans, people just have have a bias against them for why they just always want to call him out on social media. But I really don't feel like Bill O'Brien has done that bad of a job calling plays for Alabama. As a matter of fact, I think he's done a pretty solid job. Now, is he at a Steve Sarkisian level? Nah, he's not, but I really feel like Bill O'Brien hasn't really been that bad as a play caller. And I find it kind of weird how everybody just waits for him to have, a lackluster play calling game to call him out on social media. I didn't really see nobody giving him praise when he was calling good games and whatnot. And at the same time, nobody even mentioned the fact that Alabama had so many drops, offensive line didn't play good. So I'm not really going to blame everything on Bill O'Brien, even though that seems to be the popular thing to do nowadays. And on top of that, Texas A&M had a really great game plan, man. And what Texas A&M did was they made the big plays in the big moments. When you go against Alabama or Georgia, you're going to have some things that go your way. You're going to have to be able to win the turnover battle, and you're also going to have to be able to step up and make big plays when the big moments show up, and that's what Texas A&M did. They made the big plays when it mattered the most, and on top of that, Jimbo Fisher had a field goal kicker that was able to go out and get the job done. You don't know how many times, well, I'm pretty sure you guys know how many times we've had field goal kickers, not only in college football, but in the NFL over the last couple of years, being those big game-winning field goal scenarios, and they come up short. They either kick it wide right or it hits the crossbar and it does a doink. Got to give a hats off to Jimbo Fisher, man, because, he had the field goal kicking situation figured out. He had a young team on the field that had a really great performance against what a lot of people believe is going to be a team that's going to be in the college football playoffs. And even though Texas A&M's college football playoffs, those are pretty much all but over in a lot of people's eyes, you still have a lot of things to play for. But for Alabama, man, they got a lot of things that they have to clean up, man. They're not really that dominant in the trenches that we're accustomed to seeing. And on top of that, I really feel like Nick Saban feels like this group still has a lot of work to do, and he's been saying that pretty much for the whole entire season. And I knew that there were going to be some games that Alabama was going to get tested. We saw it earlier on in the season when they played against Florida, and Florida almost came and gets the victory. They got outplayed by Florida, and they got out-dominated by Florida, but Florida wasn't able to make the big play down the stretch when it mattered the most. Texas A&M was able to make those big plays. So for Alabama, man, they still aren't really all that good up front, man. When it comes to the offensive line, there are a lot of things that they have to get cleaned up. And like I told everybody, Alabama wasn't just going to steamroll everybody on their schedule. They were going to get tested. Now, I didn't expect them to get tested against Texas A&M because of the current state of Texas A&M football right now when it comes to this season. But this was a Alabama team, man, that uncharacteristically didn't look like the Alabama team that we are known from seeing out of Nick Saban, that looked more disciplined and looked more prepared. A lot of drops, a lot of miscommunication there. This just wasn't really the poised Alabama team that we normally see out of Nick Saban, and I really feel like that's why they lost this game, was because Texas A&M didn't have a lot of mistakes. Alabama had a lot of mental mistakes. You get what I'm saying? Alabama, we don't really say this a lot about them, but they didn't really look prepared for this game, and Texas A&M had a great game plan. But the thing is, Alabama was so talented of a team that they were still able to overcome the mistakes that they had. But even then, if you keep on, messing up, eventually it's going to come back to haunt you, and that's what happened. In the end, Texas A&M came out the victory. So with Alabama, man, they definitely have to get that offensive line cleaned up when it comes to pass protection, and they definitely have to make sure that these wide receivers are on the same page when it comes to taking care of the football and also securing the football. Because my old high school coach used to say, it's no point in you playing wide receiver if you're not going to be able to hang on to the football. And you can blame the play caller all you want to, but at the end of the day, players have to execute. That's what it comes down to. You can call the best plays in the world, put all of your best players in a great position to succeed, but that doesn't matter how good of a play caller you are if your players don't go on the field and they don't execute. So Alabama's next 3 games, they go on the road to take on Mike Leach and the Mississippi State Bulldogs, who are having a pretty good season so far, 3-2. too. Then they play Tennessee. They play LSU. And when you look at the rest of the schedule, man, like Alabama should pretty much be favored in every single game from this point forward, even though I really do feel like that Tennessee game is going to be a little bit interesting because Tennessee right now is peaking at the right moment. Arkansas, still don't want to write them out late in the season. That could be a really tough matchup. So I'm really intrigued in seeing how Alabama fares for the remainder of the season against a schedule that looks pretty favorable in their schedule, because a lot of people say they're going to run the table, but at the same time, you know, everybody looked at this Texas A&M game as a game that Alabama was just going to come in and destroy, and that didn't really go down that way.